I was a bit late, sorry. I was opening a can of Coke. Welcome, everyone. We're live again. We missed you last week, isn't that sad? But this week and next week, we're back to back, which is quite funny. And actually, this week, there's double the Capture One fun, as you all know. So, welcome. For those of you that have never been on this channel before, we're going to spend the next hour editing people's own images through there. Capture One, which is a piece of software that is written by the lovely guys in Denmark, in Copenhagen. So we're going to edit your images, so images that have been uploaded by you guys over the last week or so, and we'll edit them in a way that either fixes a problem that you've raised or fixes something that I can see. Bit of a mix either way, and hopefully get the picture back to what you wanted to take at the time if there was a challenge at that time, or take it in a different direction if you wanted to be a bit more artistic and creative with it. And hopefully we'll cover all of those things in today's session, because there's quite a lot of stuff in today's session, which is quite cool. Before we get started, how do you send files into here? You send it that way, that address, paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. We'll get there in the end. That's the way that you get files to me. Send in a raw image or one with some edits. Don't send me a JPEG unless you've got a finished one that you want to compare, because we can't do much with a JPEG. This is all about editing the raw file that your camera captures, and Capture One is the tool that we use to do it. The version that we're using today is 16. Oh, what is happening today? 16.5.10. It's because there's so many numbers now. We're up to 0.10. I can't remember the last time we were at a 0.10, but what that means financially for a lot of you, if you bought the 16.5 strain of Capture One, the perpetual license version, then you're still entitled to the latest update, which is 0.10. So I thought it was going to top out at 0.9, but it hasn't. There's been a new one. That one introduces some new camera support for an OM system and a Canon. I think from memory, there's a couple of Canon lenses, also some bug fixes, some AI improvements on people masking, and so on. If you are live in this session today, please use the chat box, the thing that's like there, I think, or there, and heckle away, ask questions, debate, challenge, discuss, lots of things, but make it interactive. That's how you're going to get the most out of what I'm doing on the screen. Otherwise, you're just watching me click mouse buttons and just accepting it. So sometimes we get things either wrong, sometimes we get things that are open for debate. Please make it interactive. Makes it more interesting for everyone. Speaking about AI masking and stuff like that, those of you that don't know, 8th of May, this Thursday, in London, or live from London, is what they're calling Next Capture event for Capture One. If ever there was a hint, it'd be that tagline on your splash screens in Capture One right now: made for portraits, built for all. So on Thursday from I think 1 p.m. off the top of my head, but I think actually a lot of the live stream stuff starts at 3. Can't remember which way around it is. Go into either your Capture One splash screen or go to capture1.com if you want to attend that live, or watch the live stream. You'll see as much as you can in terms of what Capture One are talking about for future and next releases. They are promising to deliver a lot of information and a lot of direction, so that's what people have been asking for a long time, and hopefully that's what it's going to deliver. So if you are not signed up, do. We will be back live on next Tuesday, so a week from today, and we'll probably have lots of that stuff to talk about. Right. If you missed it, a couple of weeks ago we did the latest masterclass. So we did one called Midday Magic, which covered how to shoot in the midday, how to shoot in high contrast. If you want to catch up on that, you still can. You'll find the link below in here, and that will hopefully answer lots of questions about how to get the best out of midday sun. Interestingly, before we go into anything more, I'm going to cover something which is called the ETTR dilemma or histogram thing. But before we do any of that, it's the most important time of the month, which is competition or reveal. So, who won? Runners up for April's competition. Topic was worn. If you don't know about this competition, there is absolutely nothing that you can win apart from a weird virtual statue of David Grover from Capture One. But if you want to join in, by all means, go to the Facebook group. You can find out the next topic. Next topic is live for this month. But last month's winners are as follows. So we've got Carlo, we've got Tony, we've got Ian, and we've got Ryan. Great shots. Love them. If I pull up my little Grover pointer, Carlo's one. This one is a fantastic. I'm pretty sure it's a piano, but it's close up, so it could be a huge bench or something like that, but I'm pretty sure it's piano. But yeah, on topic of worn, great. This treatment here by Tony in his shop is actually really nice. It's a really it's a well-used treatment in terms of making things vintage, but to sort of soften up the edges, soften up some of the focusing, effectively vintage it, make it a vintage camera style. This one from Ian. Ian's in hospital today. What's going on? Anyway, good news, Ian. When you come round from whatever you're doing, you won absolutely nothing as a runner-up in a competition that delivers nothing to the winner as well. So well done. But yeah, if we're looking for worn, nice bit of wood. Love a bit of wood on the beach, especially a washed up bit. And then this one, quite interesting, quite topical for some of the stuff that we've been talking about recently with Iceland and so on. But Ryan's shot of a glacial flow, water wearing through the mountain. So that's our runners up. Wonderful. I think I've just deleted David. No, there he is. Okay. And our winner is Alan. Alan wins that on your screen right now next to your name. There you go. Well done, Alan. Yeah, what's interesting in this shot, lots of people interpreted worn differently. Some in clothing, some in terms of old items, some in terms of random things like flowers and stuff like that. But what I was looking for was layers of why something's worn. To the previous runners-up, you'll see elements of that. But just a picture of an old piece of clothing doesn't really cut it. In this case, we've got wear and tear on the texture of the woods. Where are we? Around here. We've got all the patina and the paint peeling. We've got this old lady, if you look closely. And I love pictures where you look at it first, see one subject, and then you look a bit closer and you see the other. I'm not a huge fan of the placement of that light, just because we're slightly off center with it and so on. However, I like that shot. Well done, Alan. There you go. Alan got to stay up from Australia just to see his name in lights next to David Grover's bronze little body. Right. So, going back to what I was saying about ETTR and histograms, and it comes, funnily enough, from... Oops, let's get rid of Mr. Grover. There's your Growfie, Alan. Well done. It's not in the post. It's too heavy. So, Midday Magic, we covered a lot of histogram talk, and I'm just going to briefly pull up a histogram image that we actually use in that masterclass. This one here. So, brief little interlude into this masterclass one. And I'm really nervous because I'm seeing lots of conversation following that masterclass about what's the correct answer in terms of ETTR exposed to the right and how to get the best out of a histogram. And there was a diagram put up a couple of days ago, I think, which discussed, overexposed, underexposed, neutrally exposed, and so on. And I'm really nervous about the fact that it's driving some people's mindsets to be looking for the right answer when it comes to things like a histogram. So let me just get rid of that one and put, let's say that one. Okay. When it comes to a histogram, the histogram is telling you, and this is throughout Capture One, throughout any editing software, the histogram is telling you what the content of the picture is. And you'll get two versions of the histogram. One is the input histogram, so in other words, what was captured. And one is the output histogram, in other words, having made all the changes that you've done, what's actually going to come out. And when we say what's going to come out, well, the histogram ranges from 0, black, no data. And we don't necessarily mean black. What we mean is in a red, green, and blue channel, for an RGB histogram, that is. There's no red data, no green data, and no blue data. You can have a 0 red data, a 0 green data, loads of blue data. It's called the sky. So 0 doesn't necessarily mean 0 unless you're talking about all three channels being 0, and likewise at the other end, all three channels being 255 means they're all overexposed. There's no detail in any of those channels, red, green, or blue. And we try and use it, we're going to use it today, in today's editing session, we try and use it to make sure that our image is balanced, that our image is as bright as it can be, or as we want it to be, or as dark as we want it to be, which may not be dark. It may be we only want it halfway for stylistic purposes. But this whole thing about what does the correct histogram look like, or what does a neutral histogram look like, is really dangerous because, and the best way I can describe it, and I've described this to people as I've done workshops before, if you remember back to when you were driving a car. Now, for those in North America, you might not remember this because you probably didn't learn the manual. I did. I remember my teacher, my driving instructor, telling me the gears. You know, at 20 miles an hour, you should be in third gear. At 30 miles an hour, you should be in fourth gear. At 40 miles an hour, you should be at sort of fifth gear. And you'd sort of get this mantra in your head. Okay. Now I'd challenge anyone that's been driving for more than a few years. They don't do that anymore. They're not looking for 30 miles an hour equals fourth gear. You drive to the conditions. You drive to your driving style. You build your own style. Some people like to rev. Some people like to be economical. Some people like to, go from second to fourth. Ooh, spicy. The point being that you learn through experience what rules you want to break, what rules you want to adapt, and what rules you want to adhere to. So when I see someone saying about this is a perfect histogram, and I saw, not funnily enough, not the same chart, but I saw on another site a couple of days ago, the perfect histogram. That was the quote. It was this twin-peaked histogram, whatever. Well, that's not perfect if you're shooting something that's middle grey. So it depends on what you're seeing. It depends on what you're capturing. So the histogram is a tool that gives you feedback. It should never, ever, ever define your creative direction. The histogram is telling you what data was captured, and as a result of your changes, what data will be output. And you use the histogram to make creative decisions. So you may use it to say, how far can I push this bright? How far can I drop the shadows dark? How much data have I got in the shadows to pull up so I can see it more? Risk of noise. How much overexposure headroom do I have to be able to pull in detail maybe in the sky? The risk is that you've got no data in there because you've overexposed it. But you're making those decisions to create a piece of art, not to create a perfect histogram. So please get off of the whole mindset of running your creativity by histogram. It's so dangerous. And just in the same way that no one drives their car like they were taught by their instructor, please don't drive your creative vision based on what the histogram, more importantly, what a perfect histogram in your head is supposed to be. Mr. Evans, spot on the money. Let me just go back to here so we can see your comment clearly. Sounds like science getting in the way of creativity, if you ask me. Exactly that. And what I see quite often is a tendency, and it's a syndrome, I'm sure. Scientific syndrome, we're going to call it that. A lot of people want, in quotes, the right answer. What is the correct histogram? What is the right histogram? What is the correct exposure for this? The correct exposure is the one that you chose. As long as it gives you the solution or the output that you wanted. If you got a capture that matches your creative vision, then that was the correct exposure. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Yes, technically it could be overexposed, it could be underexposed. I've had images be critiqued before because the street lights that we shot into at night were overexposed. Well, surprise. You're pointing into light, and if you're looking for a correct exposure, that light can't possibly be overexposed. But actually, in reality, it is. And it is to your eyes. So I try and match what our eyes are seeing. Generally done me well so far. Stick with that. So, there we go. That all said. There's a lot of that sort of stuff in those masterclasses, by the way. But please, 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 run your creative decisions by what your eye and your mind see. Use the histogram as a tool to get the best out of what you capture. Don't let them cross over too much, because one shouldn't run the other. Oh, there we go. Soapbox off. I can sit down a little bit now. Let's go into Capture One. So here is our first image from Capture One from Georg. Now, it's interesting this. So I love an architectural image. I love things with structure and shape and balance. And it's interesting. The second we get into spirals, it kind of throws my mind off a little bit, because it means that we don't have that equal approach on either side and so on. Oh, Ryan, I'm going to quote you there. I came in late to learning about using the histogram, so I tend to favour the feeling of the photo more so than technical. I would say that's probably a good place to start with photography. The histogram stuff is a useful tool, but that's it. It's a reference. Use it as a reference. Don't use it as a driver. Right. So what I'm looking for in a structural architectural shot is balance and straight lines and symmetry and equivalence in the frame and a nice composition. The second we have a spiral, just like this. So we go one line there, and it doesn't go back to itself, it goes up to the next level. And this one here doesn't go back to itself, it goes to the next level. It means that I cannot get those concentric circles balanced, I can't get them symmetrical. But there is something in this shot that makes me uncomfortable, and funnily enough, it's not the edit that Georg thinks. So here is, I think, our original. Nope, it's not. That's our original. Wow. It's an interesting one, isn't it? So let's look at our exposure evaluation. This is underexposed in theory, well, in practice. But look at this little nub up here. That is referencing all of this stuff that is bright, and more importantly, these lights. So let's get to something that's up here. Maybe it's even the blues. No, maybe it's the reds. Because it's a bit speckled, it's going to be difficult to land on the right bit. But this stuff up here is from overexposed pixels, or certainly pixels that are about to be overexposed. So while the overall picture is dark, and this is the original, so this is the before shot, this is the after one. So what Georg's done is lifted up the shadows, or in fact the black in this case, so the darkest parts of the image, lifted them up, and it gets you all your detail back. Now the problem with it being in the shadows is it also brings up some noise. We can see that noise in there. So was there some extra room to expose a bit brighter on this one? Possibly. But the downside being that if you did overblow some of this stuff, you've lost it forever. Whereas in a shadow, we can recover. Here is an example of the stuff that we might have lost. You know, would it be the end of the world if this had gone from, look at my numbers up here, 238 up to 255 or 260? Doesn't exist, but you know what I mean. No, probably not, because it's overexposed anyway. So there is latitude in this shot to be able to expose it brighter. But here is edit 1. And here is edit 2, which I prefer. I prefer the tone of it by quite a long way. I think the fact that it's got more contrast in there rather than this that seems to have been flattened. And the difference being it's not pulling up that black all the way, it's using shadow. So shadow as a HDR tool picks up more than just the darkest parts of the image. It picks up the bottom roughly 25% and in a raked sort of fashion, so it decelerates its change as it gets nearer to the midtones. It lifts the shadows, but it lifts more of the dark stuff than the black slider does. So the black slider has a habit of flattening things because you lose all your low end contrast. The shadow slider has a habit of just softening that transition. So this, I think, is fine as an image. I think there's probably room to go a little bit brighter. If I turn on my exposure warning, we do have those exposure warnings, but look at it. It's only in the red channel that it's overexposed, 255 in the red. Look at why. Well, it's because it is literally overexposed in the red channel. So, you know, by pushing that a little bit brighter, is it going to kill us? Not really. We can, we can absolutely just push a bit more brightness, a bit more exposure, and arguably a bit more contrast to stretch it even more. So yes, we now have more exposure warnings, but they're understandable. We can actually understand why that's occurred. So this one here, look, this is bright blue. Exposure warning turned on. Yes, it's overexposed, but it's only the blue channel. Look up here on your little readout. It's only the blue channel that's overexposed. It hasn't lost all data. It just saturated with blue. It can't take any more blue data. So I'm in a place where I would sort of leave it there. I'd push it there, but that's not my issue with the shot. My issue is the architectural bit of my brain saying I'm comfortable with the swirl. I've got over it. But I always want something in an architectural shot that does feel balanced and straight and correct. Correct is an awful word, bearing in mind what I just said about histograms. But when it comes to architecture, there is actually an argument that says there is a correct line, typically, which is normally either a horizon or a vertical. And in this case, while this spiral is stuck, we've got what we've got, there is actually a line, it's a horizontal line that should really be adhered to here. Look at the center of these parts. I'm just going to bring up our exposure so you can see it a bit better. In the center of each of these little atriums is what looks like an air conditioning duct. And if I look at this glass at the top, we do actually have a center line that continues across here. So I would have wanted, really, if I was shooting this, I'd have wanted that twist, because I would want that line, and I can use just the straightening tool to intersect straight across that middle. Now you can see here the actual shot slightly off center, so it's not quite in the middle of it, but I'd be there. Now let me just pull that exposure back down to where we were, roughly there. And I might want to pick on a different crop, so I've got a weird thing here. But I would be in a place of wanting that straightness across the shapes to give me something that I can anchor my eye to. I can now see this line that goes across here. It's still slightly off, as I say. We haven't quite got it. I could fix that a little bit with keystone. So if I change my keystone to be horizontal, what I've got to do effectively is stretch this side down a little bit. So let's just do that. It's a tiny little change, but that would give me more of a straight line if I look at the midpoints, as it were. Not perfect, but to me, this here is twisted. I'm happy with the spiral, but I want something that's quite bold, quite iconic. I want something that's got a something that I can hang my hat onto visually. I can see where the anchor point of this shot is. It's that straight line that runs through here. Everything else, spiraling round, no issue whatsoever. George, when there is only one color channel overexposed, should we worry about printing, or will it be okay? It depends on why. Again, it's the interpretation of it. If I have a red traffic light, great example actually. If I'm shooting a red traffic light, I would expect, in fact, so if I don't see this, I think there's a problem with my exposure. I would expect the red to say 255. You might find extra little bits of green in there where there's a slight yellowing of the red tones. It's not uniform red. Maybe an LED would be, but traditional traffic light, you'll see slightly different variations from the red, and that's where you'll see the green and blue channels come in. But I would traditionally see 255 on the red if I'm shooting into that traffic light. So of course I'd be fine with that for printing, because it's a red traffic light. I'm literally printing pure red. I can't get purer red than pointing into a bright red, correctly color assigned light. To a certain extent, same with sky, although sky tends to be not solid blue. You tend to get a lot more variation. But the same with a green traffic light. You'd have the same challenge. So the answer is, unfortunately, with lots of things in photography, it depends. Should you worry about printing? Not if you can explain why something is overexposed. Now, I'll give you the example in here that we just talked through. This here is being reported by Capture One as overexposed. But it's not. It's clearly not. So if I look at this little dot here and look at our readout at the top, let's find one there. My luminosity is 161. So on a scale, on a grayscale term, across all the channels, 0 up to 255, I'm about 2/3 of the way up at 161. I'm not overexposed. What is overexposed is the blue channel, for sure. Not only is it blue, it's also very bright. That's gone off the end. But the red and the green channel, perfectly fine. And if I look at the histogram on the left-hand side, so didn't want to move the mouse, but over here on the exposure evaluation, and here in the histogram, when I move my mouse to the same position here, which is using luminosity, Not using individual color channels. I can't find a 255 bit now. There we go. You'll notice on the original raw, so the exposure evaluation, it was actually slightly over 0, slightly overexposed. On the new one, it's an upper midtone. So in the histogram, the output is an upper midtone. They're not overexposed. They're not problems. And printing would be perfectly fine with this because I know why that's saying it's overexposed. If you're looking at something and seeing it's clearly flat overexposed, it's overdone. So for instance, here, look, with this light here, if I turn on my exposure warning, yeah, we do have an issue here. And it's not just the red channel. You can see 255 red, 255 for green. So both red and green, in other words, yellow, are overexposed. Blue is getting up there as well. So what I could do, if I wanted to really fix this in here, I'd be a bit more selective. I'd create a new layer. I would, let's see if we can get the spider's web. Really difficult when the mask is in red, isn't it? We could change that, but I've got my mask there. Let me just turn it to a grayscale mask so you can see. Great. Now, with that mask, I can, on this particular layer, so I don't want to affect everything else, but I could pull down white. And remember, when it says white, it doesn't actually mean white. That's the problem. It means anything in the upper end of the histogram. So that could be white. It could apply equally to an overexposed one, a highly exposed red or a green or a blue channel. I'm going to add a color readout here. So this tells me my values as I'm moving this down. So as I pull the white down, we've dropped it. 252, 252, 239, 250. So I've got rid of my overexposed warning on something that would be traditionally something that is seen as blown out. Now in practice, and this is where I do struggle with it, to turn the warning off. So there's our shot with it fixed. There's our shot without it fixed. Fixed, not fixed. Fixed, not fixed. Was that worth it? No. So again, it's just about what's the right tool for the outcome that you want. And if you can understand why something is flagging as overexposed, bearing in mind your exposure warning is either red, green, or blue, or a combination of those channels is overexposed, it tells you a very different story to it is overexposed and there's no detail there. There's just no detail in one or more of the channels. Editing wise though, Georg, I'd be on a page of doing what you've got here. I'd just straighten that up. And my temptation would be, funnily enough, to push your clarity a little bit further even on this sort of shot. But that would be it. You could play, if you wanted to, with a bit of color balance. So for example, we could make our shadows bluer, like this, and our highlights redder, or maybe even over to the yellow or something like that. We could make our midtones redder. Again, shadows bluer. You could play with this because it starts to become very abstract. But that's for you to play with. The only thing for me would be to try and avoid that twist. I've got to have something visually that I can anchor to. Right, Roger's shot of a rainbow. How did Roger do with a rainbow? Well, pretty good actually, Roger, although there is another tool that you didn't touch which might have saved you an awful lot of hassle. So first thing, I'm going to clone the variant. So that means that what I'm editing now is not Roger's original edit. It means that I've got a second copy of it, and that's the first thing I would do if I'm looking at someone else's work. Secondly, I might color tag it. So if I press the minus key on my keyboard, I have a red square for my tags sort of thing. And that means I can keep track of the one that I've edited versus the original one. More color tags are available. Where are we? We can change red, orange, yellow, green, blah, blah, blah. But some of them have got shortcuts. So what have we got here in terms of before and after? There's our before. There's our after. I would say it's possibly a little oversaturated, a little bit too punchy, but not to a huge extent. I'm kind of chilled about that. If I look at these layers and we go through them one by one, so we've got a slight dodge, so in other words, a lifting of the mist that's over those mountains. We've got a lifting of the village over here because it's sat in a bit of shadow. I love this name of this layer, mountains minus rainbow. So if I press the M key on my keyboard to see the mask, I get literally the mountains minus the rainbow. Now, here's one where I would be very careful with that sort of a mask, and I'll show you why in a second. There is a burn layer for some reason out here, so that is to darken something that Roger felt was a bit too bright. Fine, no worries there. Foreground bushes, what's that do? It's just darkening them. I would back that away a little bit. I think it's too much of a clash to contrast. So you've got an opacity slider here. I just back it away. Yeah, maybe a little bit there. And then we've got our rainbow layer. Now the rainbow layer, here is the problem that I have with this way of doing the rainbow layer. It is so harsh. I can see where the mask is. That's the problem. If I turn this off, I've got a natural looking rainbow. I turn this on, it's almost like someone's put Tipex or whiteout or whatever across it. And I get the layer, don't get me wrong. So in this layer, we've got a shift in levels. Don't think there was a white balance change, and I think, yeah, there's a huge saturation shift. So using the color editor, it sort of protects too much of a change. But this levels change is quite extreme, and because there's no drop off, let's just look at the layer. It's quite, although it's got a soft edge, it's quite harsh. And it just means that I can see that someone's painted it on. It's almost like we've gone and stuck a rainbow onto the shop. So if it were me, and we've obviously got the complication of this mountains minus the rainbow one, because that's got some clarity on there. I'm going to delete these two layers. I'm going to create a new layer called New Mountains. Use an AI brush, and I'm just going to choose that whole area here. Don't care if it gets stuff in or not. The reason why is because we are going to refine that mask, one of the most useful things. So we're going to spread the mask to similar areas and have a nice soft fall off. And with that, we're going to use our general clarity, like that. We're going to use a bit of dehaze as well, just to bring them back. And this brings back a lot of saturation. This is what I was saying about earlier. So just be careful with that. Sometimes when you do a dehaze, you might want to desaturate just a little bit. You might want to even pull back a little bit of exposure just to keep it natural. And if I look at that brightness there versus this just feels just a touch more natural. Then we've got our problem of our rainbow. So very, very simple. We're going to go with a soft brush. We're going to create a new layer called Rainbow 2. And I'm going to use a really, really, really soft brush. So no hardness. And I'm just going to draw. Could have done with seeing my mask. There we go. Just going to draw over where the rainbow is roughly. Roughly is the key point. Okay. Grayscale mask. If you want to do it, Option and M or Alt and M, or click up here, go to Display Grayscale Mask. Sorry, mask. Refine. That's too much. I'm going to bring it back to here. And this gives me the same mask, but with a lot more spread. And what I can also do with it is I could feather that mask now. And feathering gives us a bit more of a blur. So what I'm doing is I'm effectively hiding the fact that I've drawn a mask over it. And it's just a more subtle way of doing the mask. With this one, clarity, yes. Here's the thing. We have there's a pro tip section on this channel. Have a look at it. In there's one on clarity, and there's some useful exercises in there, and there's some downloads that you can actually play with the different modes of clarity. What I see quite often is a lot of people leave this on natural, and natural does a great job in most situations with clarity. But you've got these. Classic was the original one. It overdid it. Neutral was actually a very, very nice version of clarity because it didn't shift the colors too much. It kept it quite strong, but it didn't shift the colors in the same way that classic did. Punch does a neutral but whacks up the colors. And natural does it in a very subtle way that says you shouldn't really be able to discern the fact there's micro contrast added rather than there at the time. So given what I've just said, given that I want to make a rainbow become a bit more punchy, this could be our next competition. I'm going to switch this to punch. and I'm going to ramp up my clarity. And I might want to put up some structure as well. Now, I don't want to push it too far. And most importantly, if I start to see edges coming in, there's a really subtle difference here. There's a bit of purple, but there's a bit of a dark edge there, and that's coming from the clarity. So I'm going to use then, and this is where there's no avoiding this. You're going to have to do some legwork. I'm going to use a small brush with a low opacity, only halfway, and I'm just going to brush out some of the edges out of this so that they don't appear too obvious. There's probably enough there. Let me just check my mask. Oops, sorry. Wondered why that wasn't doing what I was expecting. I want the eraser, don't I? See, we all get things wrong. It's fine. Right, let's go to my eraser. Much useful, much more useful. So, small size, very soft, low opacity, about halfway. Let's see what I can get better this time. And then, yeah, we're just going to edge out the bits where it looks like there's a hard line. When there is, or if there is a hard line, we don't want that because it shows that we've masked. So we're just, and if you look at the grayscale mask, what you can see is we're just taking out some of the edges. That's all, but it's really subtle, but it has a fantastic effect. Now we can still, with this, we can use either the color editors one or we can use the standard one. We can pull up our saturation a touch, but just bear in mind you're not saturating just the rainbow, you're also saturating what's behind it. So you've got to be really careful you don't overdo this, because look at these fields, for example. We get away with it because of the yellow, but just be really careful that if that has overdone it, and again, this is all about legwork, in my rainbow, because I've used saturation, I'm going to go back to my eraser and I'm going to take out maybe 30% out of these fields, so they're not quite there. But you get the idea. This is a very subtle way of keeping a natural looking rainbow. And if I now go back to this one, do you see what I mean about it looks like it's been painted on versus here where it was absolutely part of the image? Now, there may be somewhere in between. There may be a mid ground. So maybe we have a little bit of my rainbow and we have maybe 20% of the original rainbow in there as well, just to give it an extra little kick. Whatever you want to do. But I would say that this feels a bit better than that. This feels more intense, ironically, because you've got more clarity on the mountains as well, than here where it feels a bit washed out and sort of stuck on. This foreground here I mentioned earlier, the contrast's a bit too harsh for me. So what am I going to do? I'm going to actually pull down contrast, and I'm going to pull down a bit of exposure, and I'm going to pull down some saturation. We're going to desaturate that foreground, just so it's not quite so punchy. Oh, there we go. Look as well. Bit of clarity. We've got punch clarity on foreground. Let's just pull that back. And it's just to get it away from being this very much in your face. This becomes almost the subject. To here, it's about pushing that subject back out into that valley. So that's where I'd be with this shot. So there's no issue with this as an edit. It's just if you want it to be less obvious of what's happened and more natural, I would be tempted to use punch clarity, a little bit of saturation, and make sure that mask is really, really soft. So a couple of questions. Francois, I don't think you finished your question. Hyper, when you edit, is your answers at the end of the show. Tim, I've played with clarity options a few times, but tend to forget they are there. I should really remember this next time I'm trying to edit the rainbow. Absolutely. The clarity options, funnily enough, have evolved. So you didn't used to have these options. So there was originally, where were we? It was classic. It was just clarity. And then they introduced neutral, which was a bit punchier, but didn't affect colors so much, or saturation. Then we got punch, which is great for cityscapes, by the way. If ever you do want to use clarity to boost a bit something in the city, punch is wonderful at it. And natural is, 85-90% of the time, natural is a great option in clarity, but it's not always correct. Bad, what I just said earlier. It's not always the best option. Sometimes you may want to use one of the other ones. Oh, there we are. Francois back. So, is your standard setting when you edit, put your exposure warning on or off, and put it only when you want to check? I personally, when I load an image in, will turn on my exposure warning because I want to see what I'm dealing with. And I can generally see what I'm dealing with visually. If not, then I can look at the histogram. But if I really want to check, exposure warning. If you are going to do this personally, and again, this is about personal choice, in your exposure tab, I would have your exposure warning set to 255 and 0. By default, it comes in at something like 250. I don't want to know when something is nearly overexposed. I want to know when it is overexposed. I like absolutes. So set this to 255, set this to 0, and now Capture One is telling you something is beyond 255 and is beyond 0. Then do your edits. And I said this, I think, last time. If ever you're playing with levels or curves, when you've finished playing and tweaking, go back and turn on your exposure warning and check. Just make sure you haven't pushed it too far or not. I wouldn't have it on while I'm editing because it's going to get in the way and you're just going to see red all the time if you're operating in the upper areas. In answer to the earlier question, which I think was from George, about should I worry about something overexposed? So this area here, as far as Capture One is concerned, is overexposed. Should I worry about it? No. That's going to print just fine. It's telling you that the blue channel 255 there is peaking. You could pull it down if you want to. You could fix it in quotes, but in reality, that's a perfectly fine print. You'll be fine. Okay. It's more work required. Not necessarily. It's just a case of sort of calming this down a little bit. Don't make it quite so separated from the rest of the image. Simon, so funnily enough, we talked about this in a session ages ago about landscape long exposures, a masterclass actually, and we talked about filters, especially with color cast. Here is a wonderful example, so thank you, Simon, of a filter causing color cast. This is the raw from the camera. Obviously, the water was not red. Obviously, the sky was not weird magenta. Sorry. Fair point, Alan. Actually, there we go. Simon, I fixed it. There's your image. We could just grow for it. Inspired by. It is a growthy in the water for those of you that are asking, but it's just a slightly weirder one. So when you put anything in front of the glass in your camera, and in fact, even the glass in your camera, anything between the light coming in and hitting your sensor is going to affect the quality of that light. It affects the wavelengths of light in different ways. So some pieces of glass, and I mean this even to the purest diamond, it doesn't matter. Anytime you pass light through a substance, you affect it in some way, shape, or form. Wavelength, most important, mostly. So some substances will cut more red. Some will cut more orange. Some will cut infrared. Some will cut ultraviolet. Some will cut blue. Some will cut. And the subtle changes are what all these filter manufacturers are trying to minimize. But when you stack filters, and in the case of certainly some of the lower end filters, where they're not quite so hot on quality control, what they're relying on is your camera's auto white balance doing the work for them. Because when your camera sees through a color cast, it will try and fix it through auto white balance. But if it doesn't, for whatever reason, or if you've got a manual set in there, or it's got a weird cast that your camera can't quite work out, you end up with a color cast as an output. Now, the advantage of using a raw file format is that, of course, we can check, we can alter our white balance after the effect. We can fix it, but it's not great. And ideally, you want them as neutral as possible. If you see a filter manufacturer say they are color cast free or zero color cast, they are lying to you. And I'm happy to go on record and say that. There's no such substance as a completely color cast free piece of glass or plastic, which is what half of these filters are made of. Resin, in quotes. So you have to adapt to it. You've got to allow for a little bit of that, and that's why we love shooting in RAW, because I can fix it. And actually, most cameras' auto white balances will also help. They'll see through it and they'll try and adjust. But sometimes, just sometimes, you end up with a scenario like this. Now, in this case, Simon mentioned that he used, I think, an 8-stop filter. It got it down to a quarter of a second. It's not enough to really smooth the water. This was at f22 as well, so you can get the mindset. This was a struggle. I wonder if ISO 125 is a base. But yeah, if you're at your lowest ISO and you've made your aperture as small as possible, in this case f22, and with an ND8 you've only got down to a quarter of a second, the chances are you're not going to be able to really smooth the water. And as a result of putting that filter on the front, we've got a bit of a color cast. There are a couple of things we could do. So digitally, you could have taken lots and lots and lots of these shots and averaged them out in a pixel editor. Lots of ways of doing that. But what we can do is we can soften it a little bit. I'll show, so we can fix the color cast. We can talk about that in a second. And we can soften it a bit. You're not going to get the same amount, but you can soften it a bit. So fixing the color cast first. Let's try auto. Actually, it's not bad, right? It's not quite where Simon got to. This is Simon's version of it, and that was manually done. But that's auto. So auto, assesses the scene, evaluates the overall scene, and says, well, what should white look like? And it will go click, and then there we are. It's not quite there though, right? It's better. It's less pink, but just for reference, not that long ago, I used to use color casting filters to generate different effects in sky. It's not all bad. So that's our auto. What about using a picker? Now the picker relies on me finding something that should be neutral gray. Doesn't have to be white or black, but it should be neutral. Pick on a cloud in the midday sun, because typically that's a relatively even white balance. And we get pretty good there, right? It's not bad. This is Simon's. I would say that's almost too pinky blue. This is probably a bit more neutral. So then it comes down to styling, which is I might want to, I don't know, pull this down a touch more, maybe get rid of some of the green tint so I get to there maybe. I think that's probably a fair one. This is Simon's edit there. I would, if I'm being neutral, I would get to there, if I was honest. So then, what about this water? Well, we can't go back in time. We can't make it into a long exposure. But what I can do is using the AI brush is mask around Rover. So I've got a mask here. Now, what would make the water smoother? No contrast would be a start. But that's the extreme contrast. The contrast tool is typically the stuff that's brighter than middle get brighter, stuff that's darker than middle get darker. It's almost like a reversed S-curve. So there's another clue, S-curve. Let's take a Luma one, and we could lift our shadows, and we could drop our highlights even more. This is almost like a manual contrast tool. And then I could actually say, I don't want you actually getting any darker than that, and don't want it getting any brighter than that. So without, with. Okay. Then we've got our clarity tool. Leave it on natural, but I can do that with clarity and smooth it all out. Now, just to be clear, I'm going way over the top here. So this isn't what we would normally do. But I can also add in a bit of haze into there. So now I have my perfectly smooth water. Now, that is not helpful, right? It's too much. But I think using those tools without doing them all individually, I think backing this away to maybe about half of that will give you enough. It's just enough to take it from there to there, if you want to. It's not going to be perfectly smooth. It's not the same sort of milky, silky, long exposure trick, but if that was the goal, it gets you there. Now in a final, I would be in a place of just quick things, because this is quite a factual setup. I wouldn't be too keen to manipulate it too much. Now, you've just seen me do something, and something weird has happened, right? I used the healing brush, the little band-aid or Q on the keyboard, and said I want to get rid of that little rock down there. And it has, but it's left a ghost of it. Here's a little trick. If ever you do that and the healing brush isn't working, look at your other layers. Because look at my AI mask. When it was masking, it obviously didn't include the rock. Which means now I'm doing a healing layer, It's removed the rock, but the mask below that softens it doesn't have the rock included. All I've got to do is add in the gap into that mask, and then it's fixed. So be careful with healing brushes. Whenever you're doing a healing brush, remember it's only reacting to other masks. So if those masks below or above have additions and subtractions from them, then the healing brush is also going to mimic those when it does its work. It's going to amplify those additions, because we've got rid of the rock, but it's still not in the mask for our smooth lake. Paul, can you give me a clue about using a number of images in another editor to get frame averaging? I had a very similar issue yesterday. So there's a function in Photoshop called statistics. I'm not going to go into it in huge detail here, but if you do a bit of a search for statistics and frame averaging, you would find that there is a scenario where you could take, let's say in this case here, you would probably want about 30 shots. Just to be able to get it smooth, and it will take those, and everything that doesn't change is static, and everything that does change is averaged out by mean across those 30, and that's effectively what my phase 1 camera is doing inside, but this is done after the fact, and you just have to take all the shots. But have a little search for statistics averaging Photoshop and you'll see it. Francois, just a question about the white snow, which here is grey. Was it like that? Well, it's not snow, these are clouds. So there's not snow on the mountain here, Francois. I think it's genuinely clouds. For some reason my my hand tool's not working, but anyway. So I don't see any snow out there to pick on. The clouds, however, yeah. So if we want the clouds to pop a little bit more, of course, create a new layer. We could. Not going to. I'm going to use a built-in style brush that comes with Capture One under enhancements called Deep Sky. I'm going to draw a little bit, and I'm going to clear that, add an AI mask for the sky, and I get a nice little pop. Now it still doesn't really make those clouds stand out, but I have now got at least a layer, which means that I could use my Luma range here on that layer and say deepen the shadows, but lift everything else in there, and go to the blues, reduce their lightness, this is the cyans, increase the saturation and make them more blue, increase that saturation, this is the deep sky layer, remember, and darken it down, and you get a bit more of a strong effect in there, but you know, again, your choice. So how do we fix color cast? 3 ways. You can do your white balance manually. You can adjust those sliders that you saw me do at the end to fine tune it. You can choose using the little picker, this one here, an area that should be neutral, not just gray, black, or whatever, but a neutral color. Be careful with light falling on objects, because it obviously changes the color of that object. Or you can try the auto, but the auto, as you saw, doesn't really work. But if this was, oops, let's just create a new one. If this was out of camera and that's our new version, yeah, I'd say that's an improvement. But yes, the actual answer, I think it was Simon, get a 10 stop filter, or 11, or 12, or 15. Something like that. Okay, Bill. Bill had a similar question, but for a very different reason, funnily enough. How do I remove the color cast off of this person's face? Now, here's the problem that I'm going to explain. So we've got, I love this head. We've got a head layer. We've got a heel layer for, yes, a bit of shiny stuff on that strap. But it's the head layer that's interesting. So if I were to turn this off, we see it's quite harsh contrast. This has lifted it a little bit. We've reduced the contrast, lifted up the exposure. Personally, I don't think you need to go quite that far. So I think you would probably reduce that contrast change and reduce this a little bit, and then pull up brightness a touch, maybe lift shadows a bit more. But the key thing on this is to not let those highlights blow. And again, so what's actually blown? There's detail in here, right? So it's saying it's overexposed. Yes, some channels are. There's still detail there, so just don't go too carried away. But yes, we can pull highlights down. Now, the cast that's on this person's face. The problem is it's not cast, it's light. So it is a form of cast, obviously, but it's not the same as what we were talking about just now with filters. I would be in a place where if you want, so this is a typical lighting setup actually in a concert. You've got a blue and a red or magenta light across the person. It gives this actually really nice contrast. But if we don't like this and it's got a bit too far, I would be in a place where I wouldn't be doing it through the white balance tool, which is what we typically do it through. I'd be doing it in the color editor. And in here, I'm not seeing anything in there or in there or in there. So we haven't done it at all to the head. So we could do this in the basic tab, but let's do it through advanced. Let me just get rid of our exposure evaluation so you can see a bit clearer. So I'm going to pick on this pink here. And I could use the skin tone tool, but actually I don't need to in this case because it's a bit simpler than that. I've got a hue change, so I can make this pink go more pink, or I can make it go more blue. Now, in this case, because the rest of the outside area is a little bit blue, I'm just going to pull it down a touch so it goes, slightly blue. And then I'm just going to desaturate the pink a little bit. Not too much. Don't go to there. If you see here, this is where it falls off. Now, this is what smoothness is about, because if I increase the smoothness, you'll see that fall off improves. And actually, if I start to increase the wheel here, you'll see it starts to affect other bits. That's too much. You don't push your saturation that far. All we're doing, remember, we're coming from here, right? So maybe down to about there. Okay. And then in the same area, we could change. So these are midtones. You can see in the histogram, these are sat in the midtones. Our midtones here, we could move them away from being quite so pink and make them into almost maybe a slightly yellow or something like that. I wouldn't push it too much further than that. And that's all it's done. It's gone from there to there. And this is why I'm saying just be careful with this stuff, because it may not be, in this case it's not really color cast in the truest sense of the word, which is why I wouldn't push it too far. I wouldn't push the fix that far. I would just back it away a little bit and very selectively, like you've seen from here to here. But you are losing as a result of that, the fact that the lighting is what's done that. And yes, to Jed's point, so if you're going to do that on the face, you'd probably do it on the hands as well. They're slightly out. But yeah, you do have a very purple hand and a very yellow hand. So what all I'd be tempted to do actually is create a new layer. I'm going to use the AI brush. Choose this hand. There. I'm just going to switch to grayscale. So remember Option and M. Refine that mask so it's a bit softer. Hit apply. And we're then going to, really easy way of doing this. Right click. Oh, sorry. Being silly, I didn't save it in the first place. Head. Save adjustments as style. I could do it as a style brush, but we'll do it as style. So I'm going to save this. And because my machine is now looking for a network thing, that's a problem. Head and hands, doesn't matter. Call it whatever you like. And then in my new layer for my hand, I can say apply adjustments from custom styles, head and hands. And it's going to apply it to the hand. So you can see there to there. Subtle change, not massive, not done a huge amount with it, but can it help? Yeah, for sure. Is it right? You know, this was the lighting, that wasn't. Yeah, I guess if you want it to look more natural, go for it. But just bear in mind that you're not fixing cast, you're just fixing the shadow tone from the lighting, which happened to be pink. Do we have time for Ken's? Oh, yes, we do. Right. Ken, the answer to the question is yes. So Ken asked, is this a good edit of what I've done based on what I've done over the last few years? Ken sent in a few over the last few months, and we've edited lots of them. And actually, this is a really nice rendition out of this scene. So the answer to your question, Ken, of has it edited well? I would say yes. There was the original, quite stark up in the sky. this then lifts it. Now, the only thing to bear in mind is you have increased some noise in there. And it's just through this sort of well, not over, but it's quite a lot of shifting with levels, but also, clarity's up there to 90. I could have, even without looking, I could have told you the clarity's a bit too high. But, I see why you've done it. If you are going to do that, I'd be tempted to go into the detail and just use a bit more noise reduction, specifically on the sky clarity layer. You see that's sort of smoothed it out a little bit. It's got rid of some of the graininess in there. But as an edit, from there to there, I'd say that's well done. This, you could, if you wanted to, reduce a bit of saturation, just so it's not quite so punchy. But all we're talking about here is personal choice. It's not necessarily things that must be done. This is now the fun bit. This is about how we artistically manage stuff. But, pulling it down just from going there down to there, maybe that pulls the eye up a little more. But yeah, good job. I don't think there's much wrong with that. Well done. Right, so today, Ken, good job. Bill, good job. I mean, you've captured it well. There's nothing wrong with this shot, is the funny thing. But if you do want to get rid of that color cast, just be really, really light-handed with it. Don't push it too far. Simon, this one, yeah, honestly, color cast, if you talk to anyone with filters, they'll tell you the same. It is a problem, and it needs either some heavy investment or to try and reduce the amount of filters that you're putting in front of the lens. In answer to the question someone asked earlier about is there a halo out by the edge, no, there isn't. There may be around the shadow or the statue. We need to mask that out a little bit more by overdoing declarity. Roger, just be a little more purposeful with that change in the rainbow and use the punch clarity for rainbows. It's a great tool for it. And Georg, again, nothing wrong with this shot. It's just my mental issues with things not being straight. Anyway, so that's it for this week. On Thursday, as I say, is next capture. You're all welcome to join it live. In between now and next week, you can also join any of those things. You'll find the link down below for masterclasses. But ready for next week. Send your files in using that tool, paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. Look after yourselves. See what you get out of Thursday, and we will see you next Tuesday. Between then and now, cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.